Homey Pro is a smart home hub with incredible features, but there's a lot that people don't know about this system. There's not a lot of documentation about it, and there are a lot of tools and options that you have access to when you get this hub. You can build a pretty incredible smart home if you have the basics right. So today I've produced this full beginner's guide to setting up and working with Homey Pro. Hello Automators, thanks for tuning in again. I'm Brian from Automate Your Life, and my goal is to help you save time and money on your journey to live smarter. So if you like that idea, hit the subscribe button now. This video is very long, and we're going to cover a lot of different topics, including things like basic setup and where to place your hub, how to build proper networks, what you can connect, and how to get things connected properly. We're going to cover lots of the settings and options that you need to work with. And of course, I'll be showing you their automation engine, which is one of the most incredible things about Homey Pro. So with the video being very long and covering so many topics, we have lots of time codes down in the description to help you move throughout the video as you complete different things. Now let's get to the basics of setting up Homey Pro. Now, Homey Pro isn't exactly a cheap hub, so when you're opening it up for the first time, you might be surprised by how little is in the box. All you'll find is a quick start guide, the adapter for plugging into your wall, and a USB-C to USB-C cable, plus the hub itself. Now, at this point, it's as simple as plugging in the cable to both the adapter and the hub, and then plugging that adapter into the wall. But placing this hub is something you should think about before plugging in that adapter. Plus, what's inside the hub and how some of those internals work drives the decision to place this somewhere in your home. So I'm going to show you a couple of development shots of this hub to explain what's inside the Homey Pro and how it affects your decisions. Now, the big heat sink you see is covering a Raspberry Pi 4 module, and it helps to dissipate heat throughout the larger container. The Raspberry Pi gives the hub its processing power, but what's more important to you is the antenna PCB, or the big old circuit board. You would see that as the main board, and it does tie everything together, but it includes a large number of radios. They are radios for different smart home wireless technologies. The ones in Homey Pro are actually really high powered versus some of the other smart home hubs that you can use today. In fact, Atham told me that in order to get certification on this hub, they had to turn down some of the power outputs so that they weren't over thresholds normally used for these smart home radios. Smart home radios allow you to connect to all the different smart home products available on the market today. And while Homey Pro can't connect to everything, it has all of the antennas and required modules that you will need to connect to Z-Wave, Zigbee, Thread, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and even to communicate with 433 megahertz and infrared signal controlled electronics that you have in your home. That's pretty much every technology that's used in smart homes today, with a few omissions. There's no LoRa, and you didn't hear me say Matter. Now, Matter isn't a specific wireless technology, but it's actually something that brings a few of these together. Homey Pro is compatible with both Matter over Wi-Fi and Matter over Thread products, but there's a little bit of nuance to that situation, and we'll talk about that later. So these radios are strong, and from all of the discussions I've had with the company, they are omnidirectional, which means they broadcast generally in a spherical pattern. There's more details to it, but generally you don't have to think about directional radios, and therefore you don't have to think about placing this on one side of your house so that radio's facing the right way. And I think in a lot of cases, a central location is going to be great for this system. And that's what I did with it. But there are a couple of things you'll want to think about in terms of these technologies being used in order to get the placement right for you. Now, the infrared blaster comes out of the top of the casing. It's actually transparent, at least as far as infrared signals go. So if you want to be able to control your TV, for example, using infrared, then you will need to have this in sight of your television. Now that doesn't mean you gotta place this hub on its side pointed towards a TV, because infrared signals do bounce around your room a bit. But if you place this under a shelf, then your infrared signal might not get there. The other consideration that's important right now, but might not be important in the future, is the fact that the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi radios are sharing an antenna. Now right now, Atham does have a bit of an issue where some people might experience some disconnections using those two technologies heavily at the same time. Now Homey Pro can connect to Bluetooth devices directly, and that's actually one of the options with a company like SwitchBot. But this hub requires a connection to your home's network, and they do that by default through Wi-Fi, since it's so easy to do and doesn't require any additional physical hardware. In general, you should be using an Ethernet connection to your smart home hub. That's a much more reliable method, and it will forever eliminate this issue that Homey Pro has. Now, Homey provides 3 official options for solving this, with the first being an Ethernet adapter that you can buy directly from them. It's not super expensive, and it is official hardware, so it will be supported going forward. And I think it does everything you need. There is another option from Google with their Ethernet adapter that they produced for the Chromecast. That's a similar option, and it might make more sense for you depending on where you live in the world. But there's a third option that will be a little more interesting to some of you. Now this is a PoE version of an Ethernet adapter from Ubiquiti. Some network switches have what's called PoE, or Power over Ethernet, which means your Ethernet cable will carry the power signal on it, as well as your network connection. This version from Ubiquiti will allow you to take an Ethernet cable and plug it in on one side, and then plug in the USB-C cable that came with your hub to the other side. In this case, you wouldn't require a separate power adapter. So in general, get this hub fairly central in your home, and it will reach very far. Try to use one of the Ethernet adapters if you can, and as always with these kinds of wireless technologies, interference can be a big problem. So you don't want to sit this right next to your mesh Wi-Fi access point, nor do you want to stick it next to a big metal box like a refrigerator. Those kinds of things will reflect and refract signals and cause issues for you. You can get this product set up using Wi-Fi and working on day one, and then install one of those Ethernet adapters later, because it'll just convert over to using that connection instead of the Wi-Fi one. Now that we understand a little bit about how to place this hub, let's get the basic setup done, get you started with Homey Pro. To get this hub set up, you'll want to install the Homey app. It's available on iOS or Android, so you can install that on your phone and or tablet. However, there's also a web app that you can use on any computer or anything with a web browser, and that allows you to log in and manage your system in much the same way as the app on your phone can. You'll find that at my.homey.app, and while it's redundant in a lot of ways, you might find it easy to work with a web app when you're creating the very complex automations that you can with this system. It's also useful for insights or data and some of the more advanced features that we will cover in later videos. And before you continue in the app, I would get your hub to its relative final location. Take it there. It doesn't have to be a permanent location, but we've already talked about where it's best to place your hub, and after we're done this setup process, we will start to build out the different Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Thread networks with this hub. And you don't want to be moving this hub a ton after that. Although those are self-healing networks, it can introduce some issues when you move a smart home hub. Once you have that app installed, you're ready to get started. There are the normal steps of adding in your first name, creating an account associated with your email address, and creating a password to get into the account. Make sure that you're using a secure email account that you have access to in case you ever lose your password. Once you're done with that, we'll start setting up the hub. Now here's how the screen looks today, and I will be picking the option to set up Homey Pro. As you go forward with that part of the process, you need to make sure of two things. Number one, make sure your Bluetooth is turned on your phone. And when the application asks, allow it to detect nearby devices and give it any location permission it requests. These are required because the app uses Bluetooth to find your hub. The second thing you have to make sure of is that your hub is plugged in and it is showing a breathing blue light on the bottom ring. Now initially the hub will show a white LED ring, and that indicates that it's booting up. Now that light ring is actually an indicator for a lot of things. If you're not getting to that breathing blue light, you'll want to do a factory reset, which is as simple as putting a pin into this tiny hole and holding it there for about 30 seconds. The LED ring will start to circle with a red color, and that indicates it's deleting all the data on board and getting the hub back to factory settings. Now it should then go to a white ring as it reboots the hub, and finally back to that breathing blue light. Once ready, the app will automatically find your hub. And it's at this moment that you will connect it either to your home's Wi-Fi or it will connect to your Ethernet network if you've plugged in one of those adapters. For the purposes of demonstrating this, I am just putting it on my own Wi-Fi network. Later, I plugged in the Ethernet adapter and switched over to that. Make sure you follow Homey's diagram on that. I actually did it wrong the first time. Now, as you continue in the process to set up this hub, you'll get a notice that the hub is being registered to your account, and then it'll check and do an update. This leaves a lot of people thinking that the hub requires the internet to operate. This is actually a pretty complicated question, and it takes a bit of explaining. It's going to be convenient to leave this hub with connectivity to the internet, because every once in a while, your hub will get an update. Also, some devices will receive firmware updates, and some of the integrations you will use will require the internet to operate and sometimes get updates themselves. However, in general, when you connect smart home devices in the right ways, and you use the right types of products, you won't require the internet. People will call that a locally executing smart home hub, and that means that you only need your internal home network to be operating in order for this hub to work. Now that's with those caveats in place, so just understand that you should, in general, leave this hub connected either to your Wi-Fi or your home's network, and that network will normally have a connection to the internet. It's a good way to have this hub, and it does get regular security updates to hopefully make sure that no kind of privacy or security issues ever exist on this hub. Okay, so we have our hub set up in the app. We're ready now to start working with it, connecting devices, but you kind of need to know what you can connect so that you know what you can buy and what you can use that's already in your home. Now that we have our hub set up, we're ready to start working with it and connecting devices. But let's go through a quick overview of the app and actually the apps that you have access to. The app is fairly simple, but you're going to want to know about a few features. Now, the homepage allows you to set some favorite devices and favorite flows. Flows are the name that Homey gives their automations, and you won't have anything in either of these sections yet. If you tap on the three dots at the top, you will not only get to pick the different devices to add to your favorites, but you can pick a row or a grid format for either the device or flow sections. The timeline section at the bottom of the main page can also be customized by choosing the type of events that you would like to have show up. If you'd like it just to be a timeline that shows when people are coming or leaving, then you can disable each section except the one you want. So this is something you can customize to the point where you have just the information on that page that you would like. The devices page that you access from the bottom of the app gives you the ability to organize those devices into different zones. It also allows you to control them, but that's how Homey works. It's important to know that zones can be nested inside of other zones, so you're able to break down your home any way you'd like. It's really important because you might want to break down the devices by upstairs or downstairs, and then you might want to break them down further into the different rooms or even sections of those different rooms. For example, you probably want to see the devices in your kitchen differently than your whole downstairs area. So when you hit the plus button, not only can you add devices, but you can add zones. And one of the first things you should do is to create zones that mirror the different areas in your home. It's because as you go forward and you add devices into your home, you'll want them to get into the right zones right away. Otherwise, it can be a bit of a management task. Now, in order to get a device into the right zone, you'll add it while on the page for that zone. The other nice thing about the devices page is that you can edit the zones, including the name, the icon that's associated with them, and also the zone that they're nested within. You can switch between different zones by tapping on the home button, but the home page has an additional option for an expanded view or a collapsed view of your different zones. That would help you to navigate quickly to those other zones. Now, each page also has some of the main device types organized at the top of the page, so you can see all of the lights in a zone, for example. You can tap in and control them all together or individually too. Now, I'm not going to go any further into controlling devices because that's something we'll take care of as we add some in. And the same holds true for the flow section. Now, inside of that flow section, you can again organize your flows into different segments. And in this case, when you hit the plus, you get a new folder option. That would allow you to organize your flows just a little bit. And I think, again, you could do this by room or zone, or you could do things by task or function in your smart home. And of course, you can add a new flow at any time. Now, when you're working in the app and you're going this route to create a new flow, you get a fairly simplistic layout. You can see when, and then. Those are the three elements of your automations. However, you can head to the web app in order to get to the bigger and more comprehensive flow creation tool. That's at my.homey.app. On that page, you will see the same sections of the app with a couple additions. You'll also likely add in more things later as you get more advanced. And on my interface, you can see that I have a segment called Insights and a segment called Homey Script on top of the Home, Devices, Flows, and Settings pages. When I create a flow in the web app, I get the option to go much deeper, and so will you. That is the Advanced Flow option. And while that will look very complicated, it's an infinite canvas for unlimited ideas. You could truly create just about anything. And that system, it mimics a lot of what I used to do in industrial automation. It's very powerful, and I think in a lot of cases, once you create a few basic automations to run little parts of your home, you're going to want to use that. Now, I'm going to head back to the main application. There's one other section, which is the More section, or what I would call settings. Now, we have the user settings at the very top, and you'll probably want to head in there to turn on home and away detection. This allows you to use your presence in the home as part of your automation. You can also manage your account with Atom, and if you ever have any subscriptions, you can manage them there. On the note of those subscriptions, there's a hub backup option, but Homey actually tells you that you can back up your hub to your PC by connecting the two. I'll leave a link below to that help page so you can do that if you'd ever like to. Now back to the main More page. If you happen to have multiple hubs, then tapping on your current hub's name would allow you to either add a new one, or if you were managing these hubs for your family or friends, this is where you would tap on their hub to start managing that system. So you can switch between the hubs on this page if you happen to have more than one. After that, there's a number of settings that we'll go through later on in the video, but generally, you're ready to start connecting devices. And we're going to start that process by understanding some of the things that we can connect to this hub. When you head into the Homey app, then you go into the Devices tab and you pick your zone. Then you can start to add products in. The hub will automatically look for devices that are in a pairing mode. So you can place Matter, Zigbee, Z-Wave, Thread, and even Bluetooth devices into their respective pairing modes through following their instructions, and then simply let the hub find it for you. When you use this method, it may or may not figure out what device you're trying to pair. It might show up as a generic device, and if you complete the pairing process in that situation, the hub won't necessarily know how to control your device. So we need to teach this hub how to manage your device if it doesn't instantly recognize it. In a lot of cases, you'll be able to search by brand name or even the name of your product. Ring searches turn up a few integrations, but if I wanted to integrate the Ring keypad, I could do that by typing in keypad. Usually you'll find what you need through that process and can just go forward in connecting your device by following the instructions that follow. In some cases, the screen will tell you that it's installing an app, and this just means that your hub is learning how to manage the device. But the app is something deeper, and this is how you can find out whether or not your device is going to work with Homey Pro before you buy the hub or before you buy one of these products. You can get to the same page that I'm about to show you through the app if you head to the More page and then into the section that says Apps. But I think this works a lot better on a web browser. So go to homey.app on a web browser, and if you do already have the hub, then you can get logged into this page because it will let you install apps as you decide you want to use them. When you're searching, you'll find that the different apps that you can install either say they're an official one or a community one. That's an important distinction to note because a community one means that an independent developer created that app. That's important for a couple of reasons. The first being that someday the developer might not do that work. The updates might stop and that might cause you issues. But it also might give you access to some non-standard features, as in you might get more out of your products by using one of those integrations. A great example of this is if you search for Ring. You can get the cameras, the doorbells, and the chimes through an official integration. That would of course require a subscription, since you have to have that for the Ring app at all today. But there's also this Ring Security one, which is a community-based app. It allows you to connect some of their Z-Wave security devices directly to Homey Pro. Or at least that's what it says on the screen, and you can tell a lot about these integrations through what it says on this page. You can hit the Install app to bring it onto your hub, and you can look at the different devices you can connect with this app. Plus, hovering over them, you can see the connectivity technology being used. And if you need more information on whether or not it's a cloud or a local connection, then you can usually see it when hovering over a product. Or you can read the description and they'll usually explain it to you there. Now, scrolling down lets us see the different ways we can use these devices in our automations. We see when, and then sections filled up with different things that might confuse you right now, but it gives you a good idea that you're going to be able to use these devices in your automations on Homey. Now, we understand how to get new features, but is there a big list of devices that work with Homey? You can go through all of the apps available if you'd like while perusing that web page, and you can do your own searches for your favorites. Device names usually work and brand names definitely do. And as an aside, I can tell you there's a lot of different integrations and a lot of different apps that you can install to do custom things with Homey Pro. Let's go through the first few connections that you will make and how to properly build out your network of Zigbee, Z-Wave, and other smart home devices. It's time to get down to it and start getting things connected to Homey Pro. Earlier in the video, I told you to make sure that you had placed your hub in what is its final resting place. The good news is even if you decide to move your hub one day, most of the devices will be fine. And that's because of what's called a self-healing mesh network. Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Thread networks are all self-healing mesh networks. This type of network should automatically get things to reconnect if they've been disconnected because you've moved them. It doesn't always work, but there is a little light at the end of the tunnel at least. There's also the Developers app, which I won't be covering fully today, but could help you to diagnose some network issues if you're ever having them. You can find it at homey.app/developer. But Homey does give you a little bit of guidance in order to try and minimize issues if you do move devices later. What they tell you whenever you connect a Zigbee device is to start with what are called repeaters. Now, repeaters have a different name depending on the technology you're using, but they all do basically the same thing. They take the signal from the hub and repeat the signal for devices that are too far away from your hub. They are used because sometimes the signals in your hub don't reach far enough. This is especially true with Zigbee, and to a lesser extent, Z-Wave and Thread. So it helps to start with a few of those repeaters around your home. Now you can identify if a smart device is a repeater in two ways. Number one, if it plugs in, then it could be a repeater. If it doesn't plug in, it's usually not. And in fact, today, I don't even know of a single device that uses battery power and is a repeater because it drains power. The second way is to check the sales page or the specifications of a device that you're looking at buying. This will often be a selling feature and will be specifically stated on the website. So it's good to connect a few of those repeaters, especially for Zigbee. But if you don't have any today, just start pairing products, and over time your network will self-heal or self-repair, and it will decide when to use those repeaters. Now with this in mind, let's go forward and connect our first couple of devices. I'm going to connect a Zigbee smart plug. It's from Third Reality and it's called the Gen 2. Now when I connect this, it will act as a repeater. From there, I can start to add a few other devices. I'm not that worried about repeaters personally. You can see that I'm doing this at my desk. So do as I say and not as I do here. It will likely affect my reliability, so I'll probably redo this network after I'm done filming this video. But you can see that adding this smart plug is as easy as it gets. I searched for Third Reality, it found that app, it installed that app, and then gave me the instructions for getting this smart plug connected. It's just a matter of putting the smart plug in its own pairing mode, which is often part of the instructions you get when trying to add a device. This will be a very similar experience as we go forward, and keep in mind you probably want to add a few of those repeaters throughout your home so that they can route the traffic to your end devices. An end device are those battery powered one, or just devices that are not repeaters. So next, I'm going to add this battery powered motion sensor called the Aqara Motion Sensor P1. That's a good little device, but oftentimes, if you're not connecting this to an Aqara hub, these products can struggle. They can struggle to stay connected, or you can struggle to get them working right. So this is a great test. But I can tell you, I've had extremely positive results with this working well over the last 4 months. Again, searching for the company name or the product name allows me to find it very easily, and otherwise, I might have to head to that web app store to search and find out if I can use this device. Now the pairing process is very simple, and it's just a matter of putting the P1 into pairing mode. Then the hub will make the connection and decide on how the Zigbee network should be organized. The same holds true for devices like this IKEA remote. And for many of your basic Zigbee or Z-Wave products, you're gonna find the brand and or the device that you're using by doing a search. And then you're gonna follow a very simple process of adding the device to Homey. Now that's a lot of Zigbee products, and I will continue down that path. In fact, the folks at Atham tell me that this hub will handle 100 Zigbee devices pretty easily. But it should be noted that as you get larger Zigbee and Z-Wave networks, latency increases. That means when you issue a command to a Zigbee or a Z-Wave device, or if it's a sensor, it tries to communicate back to your hub, it will take a little extra time. If you go over 100 Zigbee or Z-Wave devices, I think you're going to notice a slight delay. So it's good to have a bit of a balance in your home, and of course, you can use Z-Wave devices to do that. AOTech and Zeus have a lot of devices I can add into the system. Plus, I have a couple of Fabaro devices that I've already added in. And of course, similar to Zigbee, it's good to add Z-Wave repeaters first. Overall, the process for Z-Wave products is really similar to Zigbee. Now the Matter standard is still getting rolling, and You know, I'll tell you that not everything is perfect here. If you don't know what the Matter standard is, it's a standard that was created to use a number of wireless technologies in order to make it easy for smart home companies to make products that you know will work in your home. Unfortunately, it hasn't totally worked out yet and is in a lot of cases still working out bugs. But I have a couple of Matter over Wi-Fi devices and a number of Matter over Thread devices. When I say that they're Matter over Wi-Fi, then that means the box has this symbol on it and that they use Wi-Fi for communication. Conversely, when I say Matter over Thread, they are using Thread for communication and will still have that Matter symbol. That means if you enter into the app and you add a Matter device, the hub or the app you're using should be able to connect to that device no matter what technology, Thread or Wi-Fi is being used. It's still a bit tricky today because not every hub has Thread, and actually the folks at Homey have just turned on their Thread radio as I started to make this video. So today we can use both with Homey Pro. Now here's a smart plug that I'm adding using the Matter over Wi-Fi feature on my hub. These are easy enough to add, and because they are Matter, they will work in the same way as other smart plugs that have the Matter standard on them. You basically scan the QR code or you input this Matter code into the app and things should just connect and work out. Unfortunately, when this breaks or something doesn't work quite right, there's not a lot you can do except try again. With Matter over Thread, I have just one device to test out, or at least one device I think will work. That is the Aqara P2 door sensor. Now the thing with that sensor is that if I search for it in the App Store, I won't find anything. But because it's a Matter device, I can just add it because it has the standard on board, so it should work. Unfortunately for me, I couldn't get this one working. That tells you a little bit about Matter over Thread right now, but these kinds of issues should stop in the future. There are a few more device types that we can add. I'm going to show you some products from SwitchBot. You'll notice as I enter into their brand on the Homey app that some of them say BLE and then some of them say cloud. The interesting thing here is you can directly connect SwitchBot devices to your Homey hub using Bluetooth if you choose that BLE option. You won't necessarily get all the settings you would if you were using SwitchBot's app and their hub, but it's an interesting option, and today I really only know of one other system named Homey System that can do this direct connection to SwitchBot products. Now if you choose the hub option, you're able to connect that device, but you will be using the SwitchBot hub as an intermediary. And with SwitchBot, what that means is you will end up with the cloud being required. Obviously, that introduces delays, and it can also introduce reliability issues. These are the kinds of things that some people will want to avoid if they're focused on ultimate reliability and local-only communication. Earlier, I showed Ring's service, and actually, if you have Blink cameras, it happens in the same way. Those are cloud connections that are happening through the different services. But there's this final option, and the best example of it comes from Philips Hue. Now they have a hub that sits in your home, and what you're actually doing is making a direct LAN connection to it with Homey. That means it's communication happening over your home's internal network. In this case, for Philips Hue to work, you won't require the internet, as all communication happens in your home. The really interesting thing about adding devices from a service like Philips Hue is that it breaks down their types of devices. You can add a bunch of lights at the same time or just a single one. You can add sensors or buttons or other device types if you'd like. You get some options here, and you don't necessarily have to use everything from that service. Now today I don't have a 433 megahertz device in my home, so I can't show you how to add those ones. I did see that Lightwave RF is one of the brands that uses that radio, so that might be a good brand to start with here. I apologize for not having a device to show you, but let's look at infrared controlled devices. This is where you can use your hub to control something like your television. And what you'll do is you'll ask to add a device. For myself, I looked up my Panasonic TV, tried a couple of the versions available, and then found one that worked. It should also be noted that you can add things like air conditioners, media players, and some speakers, and they can be controlled over the use of this IR blaster. Unfortunately, there's not a custom remote option with this hub, and I think that's a pretty big omission, as it was something that the hubs had that were prior to this version. I've read a couple of potential reasons why, but it doesn't matter why. They just don't have it. What matters is it means that you can't program any remotes into the Homey hub. So if you can't find it in the search bar, then you can't use your device. I did find that they aggregated some of the different models of television, so you're not looking up a model of television, you're looking up a television brand usually. I can also tell you that SwitchBot has a good option through their hub too. It can learn just about any remote. Then with the cloud integration, you can bring in those infrared controlled devices. So it's not perfect, but it looks like it can be done. And there's one other device type that I looked up, and although this is a cloud integration, I think this one was pretty useful, and a lot of people will want to know about it. Now I added in Amazon, and this gave me access to their speakers, as well as control of a lot of smart home devices that I might not otherwise have access to. I've been pretty happy with the integration too, although I have had to reconnect it one time in the last 4 months. But this covers most of the device types that you will be adding, at least initially. And we'll go over more custom features in a later video, but for now, let's go on to controlling our smart devices. So now we have a number of devices, we can go back into the app and control them. The controls for each device are based on the app you use to connect it, and they are based on the device itself. As you learned in the last section, Matter devices of the same type should be fairly similar for the controls they have on them. But those Zigbee, Z-Wave, Bluetooth, and other Wi-Fi devices can be very different depending on what you bought. When you enter into any device, you'll see the different statuses that it has available, and there are a number of tabs at the bottom. You'll see a battery tab if the device has a battery, for example, and that will give you the percentage remaining in most cases. You can also go and review the history on any device, and of course you can control it if it's something like a smart plug. And finally, you can favorite the device, or you can go into its settings. Now the settings can give you basic information, but in some cases you get the opportunity to change aspects of your device. Those settings can be especially useful with different sensors that you have in your home, and those can mean the difference between success or failure with your automations. In many cases, they will affect alarms and the thresholds for those alarms. There are a couple other ways that the settings have been useful for me too. When it's a device that consumes power or is plugged into something that you know consumes power, you can put that power level into the settings. This will help you to get some data from your hub later. You'll be able to track power consumption through either one of the tabs at the bottom, or you'll see later in the video how you can use what's called insights to see how much power you're using. The other thing I've seen that is a little bit useful is you can exclude sensors from causing a zone to look like it has activity in it. That's useful later for things like automations, which we're about to get to. And when it comes to cameras, you can usually have a look at previews. Lights and switches will have options like brightness, color temperature, and sometimes, as is the case with my whiz bulbs, I have some of the scenes that the app provides. Curtains and blinds can be controlled based on percentage, and things like smart locks have kind of what you would expect. Buttons don't really have any controls on them, and if you connect services, those can sometimes show you data or have controls of their own. But controlling devices isn't really about using the app, at least not in this way. So let's instead start producing a few automations so we don't have to control anything manually. The actual building process for a basic automation with Homey Pro is not difficult. In fact, with just one simple addition to their interface, Homey has made it fairly easy to make strong automations by tapping a few buttons. When you tap to create a new flow, you'll be presented with 3 things to fill out: It's important to understand these, so I'm going to explain them. When is the trigger of your automation? So when something occurs, we're going to take action, and we might take multiple actions. When you hit add card, you will be picking just a single thing. You can't have multiple triggers because that would mean multiple events have to happen in the same moment. Moving on, and is what you would call a condition. So although our trigger has occurred, there are situations where we might want to ignore that trigger. For example, we don't need to turn on the lights if it's really bright in the room, or if it's in the middle of the day. You can have multiple conditions, and this helps you to really break down the situation in your home and make sure that your automations are running at the right time. Finally, we have then. That is what you would call actions. This is what you will make happen in your automation. You can have multiple actions, and there's a lot we can do. So let's build a simple automation to turn on our lights using our IKEA remote. However, we will use some of the power of this hub to make sure they come on the right way. The first thing we're going to pick is under the when section, and I'll be going in, finding the IKEA trad-free service, and then choosing my remote control. You can see that I have access to all the different buttons on this remote. I even have both the basic button presses and some long hold presses. For now, we're just gonna press the on and off button to trigger our new automation. If I ever wanna change how this automation triggers, I can tap back in and choose to replace the card. Of course, I can remove it too. Now, I'm gonna jump over our conditions for now. So I just wanna show you how the power of this hub can really work to your advantage. So I'm gonna go into then, and I've chosen Philips Hue. And now I can pick from all the lights in my home. I can also choose to turn on all the lights in a certain group. Those groups come from Philips Hue. They're part of that application, and this means I can eliminate things like popcorn effects, where lights come on one at a time annoyingly. I can also do more than just turn on the lights. I can choose certain scenes, and again, those come from Philips Hue. There's one final choice with this brand, which is to set the brightness of all the lights in a certain group to a certain level. That would turn on all the lights as well. For now, I'm gonna choose that, and I'm gonna choose my kitchen. I could introduce a delay to having the lights come on if I'd like, but I'm just gonna set them to 90% brightness. The thing is, this might be too bright during the day. Or maybe I wanna do something else with my lights during the day. So I don't necessarily want them to go on to this brightness all the time. And what do we do with the fact that this is an on and off button, and people will be intuitively pressing that button to try to get the lights to turn on and off? This is where conditions become so useful. The first thing I'm going to add is a date and time condition. In a lot of cases, I think as long as it's outside of sunset or sunrise, then we want the lights to turn on to this full brightness. But it looks like I can only pick if it's daytime. The great thing about this system is that I can choose that and then choose to invert it. So that means if it's nighttime and the on-off button is pressed, now we'll turn on the lights. Now there's another condition that we want to deal with. What if the lights are already on? In that case, we're actually asking them to turn off. For completeness, I'm going to add another condition where I check if one of those lights is turned on. Again, I'm going to invert that state, and so what this automation now says is if I press the on and off button on my IKEA remote, and it's both in the evening and my lights are currently turned off, then we will set the brightness in the kitchen to around 90%. So give us bright lights, but we still need to get that toggle working so the lights will turn off. You'll notice I placed this flow in a folder that I created specifically for my kitchen remote. I think this is a great way to build out your automations and have them organized so you can always find what you need. You can also nest these folders. So you could create a folder for the kitchen, and then you could place the kitchen remote folder inside of that. It all depends how you want to break these up. But if I go into that folder, I could test the automation's actions by hitting the little play button. I can also long hold on that automation, and I could choose to favorite it so that it goes on the main page. Or I can rename, move, disable, or even duplicate this. Now using that duplicate function, it allows me to create an automation that acts really in the same way, but turns off my lights. So when I press the remote and it's nighttime, I'm gonna check if the kitchen 1 light is turned on. And then I'm gonna replace the action card. I'm gonna choose to turn off all the lights in the kitchen group. So now I have 2 automations that will allow me to control my kitchen lights with this remote. Obviously, now I can go forward and add in different things. I can create additional automations that check if it's during daytime. I can add in conditions that check how bright it is in the room if I have a sensor with lumens on it. I can also use the zones we've created in our home to turn on the lights in a zone. Now, if we really want to improve these automation, there's a couple of advanced tactics that we can use. The first is to add in additional sets of conditions. So let's say that we wanted our flow that was turning on our lights to have a couple of scenarios where the lights would turn on. Maybe if it's too dark in the room, we don't care if it's nighttime. So we could do something like check a lumen sensor that sits in the room like my Philips Hue motion sensor. So what we can do is add in some additional conditions to check. I will add in a logic checker, then I'll place in the Hue motion sensor's luminance value and check that it's less than 2. I'll maybe have to adjust that later based on what I experience, but for now, let's use that. Then I'll long hold on that and pull it down to below one of the OR statements. So now this automation says when the button is pressed, we will check if it's nighttime and the bulb is turned off, or if the lumens are too low in the room, then we will set the brightness of the lights to 88%. But I still want to check and make sure that that bulb is off, or maybe I don't. You get to decide for yourself. The other advanced option is to do something quote unquote else. So if the automation runs and neither set of these conditions are found to be true at the time, then maybe you want to do something else. In this case, we can actually turn off the lights. And again, this is done by adding a new card on the then side of the automation. In this case, we'll turn off all the lights in the kitchen. And then you can long hold that card again and drag it down to below the word else. So now, this is a very complicated automation, and it actually does a lot for us. I'll probably have to add additional condition sets later, but I think you get the idea. There are just tons of options I have, and there are even some special features on Homey Pro's basic automations that we need to understand. Let's start with those zones. Those have a lot of opportunities to be used for actions, but you can also use them as a trigger or a condition for your automations. You can use whether or not a zone is active in the when and sections of your automation. If you don't remember how that happens, it can come from sensors that you have in your home and within the settings for those sensors. Those will sometimes have an option to either enable or disable their ability to set the active status of that zone. So in a lot of cases, you'll see a motion sensor can turn that zone to active when it sees someone around it, and then it can turn that zone to inactive when it no longer sees motion. You also have features like alarms, flows, logic, presence, and timeline available in every automation. I'm going to explain a few of these, but these are topics mostly left for an advanced automation video. Alarms allows you to use the smart devices you have in your home to be an alarm without using the application associated with them. For example, if you have Sonos, Google, or Amazon speakers, this is actually another way to do alarms through your Homey Pro hub. You create those alarms in the More section of the Homey app, and you just pick which days and time you want that to happen. Through automations, you can use those as triggers to start an automation when an alarm occurs. You can also use it as a condition when the alarm is enabled or disabled, and as an action by enabling or disabling an alarm. These could be really useful to cause time-based checks. For example, you can set an alarm every day for someone to take medicine, but if they go into the cabinet and press the smart button, then they don't get the warning. So you disable the alarm when someone presses the button, but you'd enable the alarm every night at midnight. This is gonna sound funny, but flows, when used in flows, can be used to start other flows. You can use it as a trigger, and actually there are parameters that you can pass into flows that can be tested. So this is a way to start multiple flows at the same time. Or if you use flows in the then side of the automation, you can pass in a flow with a parameter from your automation. You can also enable and disable other flows, so this allows you to layer your automations on top of each other. There's even more to talk about there, but it gets really complicated, so I don't want to address all of that in a beginner's video today. And when we deal with logic events, these are often based on variables that you create in the app in the More section, or they are based on values that sit in your devices. For example, if you're looking to find out how bright it is in the room, one of your sensors might have a lumens readings. I have that on this P1 sensor, so I can find that as a value inside of the logic area. I find this most useful within the AND section of our flows because it allows me to check things like the brightness or something even like the volume of our speakers. Those logic conditions, that's where most of these lie and are useful. They also let you compare values. I think that's one of the most useful functions for a lot of smart home people. This is something that's missing from a lot of hubs. And again, it's a pretty complex topic to run through, but this can be used to do something as simple as get the volume level of all your speakers to the same number. I connected my withing scale, for example, and I think of this as a great method for comparing certain things together. And although you'll have to do a little bit of work to track, for example, what your weight was a month ago, and then compare it to your weight today, but those kinds of things could be very beneficial to your health. Your ability to use presence in your automations is based on a setting in the More section of the app. Make sure that under your user account you have things like home and away detection turned on, and this becomes relatively automated. But you can actually control your presence through the use of a button and a flow. So if you had different buttons for different people in your home, they could press that on the way into the home, and for example, double press it on the way out to set their status as home or away. That can then be used in lots of your automations to make sure that the right ones are running at the right time. It's also very useful for security systems that you will likely set up with Homey Pro. You can think of your timeline like a running history of your home. You can check that specific messages were created. And so if you want to know when a certain person gets home, you can place that into your flow as a trigger. The really neat thing about Timeline is that through your automations, you can also create specific notifications with customized text. This is very useful for, again, starting automations based on another one going on. And in the then or action side of these flows, you do get some additional options. You can modify what the LED ring is doing. You can send push notifications with images. You can deal with some user-based automations. Later in the video, you'll see how to add additional users, and that's how you open up some options for automations here. Now, I imagine a lot of you are waiting for this section in the video. This is where I'm going to cover some of the advanced flow creation tool in Homey Pro. The truth is that this tool requires, honestly, its own course to really understand all the things you can do with it. But the great thing about this tool is you can start building basic automations using it, and I recommend that you do. That's because as you use this tool and as you become familiar with it, you're going to be able to do so much more than the basic tool we just covered. I'm going to show you an example of one that I've created and how to create your first couple of automations with this. To use this advanced flow tool, we'll have to go to the web app. Head to my.homey.app. Make sure you're logged in. When you go to the flow section, you'll notice that the icon is a little different when you've created one of these advanced flows. Now here's my automation that I created for my kids' room. I stuck the single motion sensor, the Aqara P1 motion sensor, and I'm using that to drive a lot of automation. In fact, one of the biggest benefits of doing things this way is that you can manage an entire process in a single automation. So these are big, but they will eliminate you from making all those extra automations like we just did with the IKEA remote in the basic tool. Now I'm just going to walk you through the basics of this specific automation, and it's not perfect. I've been talking with my kid and he wants to adjust some things, but that's some of the power of this system. So over here on the left is your when statement or your trigger. When the kid's motion alarm turns on, which is to say that it sees motion, then we start 2 paths. We check if the luminance is lower than 200, which is another part of the P1 motion sensor. And we also check that the bulb in his room is turned off. I started a second path so that I could get my Echo Studio, which is in his room, to set the volume and then to speak. It's just a way for me to know that the automation is working, and it's a way for me to track the reliability of that Amazon integration. But just so you know, you can make your speaker say whatever you want. Now, just to clarify, I don't have to start that second path, and it really hasn't changed the speed that this automation executes at. I haven't noticed any changes when I put all of the actions together on the same path. Then I'm checking that the time is between 5 p.m. and midnight. With tests like this, the blue line indicates that this is a true test. So if it is between 5 and midnight, then we set the temperature of our bulb to 100%, we set the brightness level to 50%, and we turn on the bulb. If it's not between those times, but it is still pretty dark in the room, then we set the temperature to 20%, which is a cooler white temperature on that bulb. We're setting the brightness to 100% and turning on the main bulb in this room. But we are also turning on some LED strips that sit behind his desk. So if it's during the day, he gets a little brighter in his room and he gets a different color temperature. This helps him manage his circadian rhythm and not to get blown away by the wrong temperature of lighting at night. If I wanted to, I could add in all kinds of other actions. I could continue down the path of adding different conditions to the sequence. But one of the really great features of these kinds of flows is that you can set multiple trigger statements. This is how you manage an entire process. So down below all of this automation is like a second one. It goes like this. If the motion alarm turns off, we wait a minute and then we go back and we check if the motion alarm is still off. This is one of the most important things that I've done because every once in a while, a motion sensor won't see motion because you stop moving for a bit. But if we've gone a whole minute and we still don't see motion, then we're gonna turn off the lights and our speaker will speak again. Now, there's a lot of complexity and customization in this automation, right? I'm sure you're starting to see things in my automation that you'd want to do differently. So it's better for me to teach you how to fish instead of showing you my automations. Let's do that now by learning most of the tools and options you have with this advanced flow system. When you're using the web app and you choose to create a new flow, you get 2 options. One is a standard flow and the other is the advanced flow option. When you choose advanced flow, you're getting this big open space. It feels a little daunting, but in the top left corner, we have the add button. The thing you're gonna start your automation with most of the time is a trigger. There's actually some other options in this tool. So what we'll choose is when. And now you have the same interface you had in the Homey app when creating a basic automation. Let's do something that's a little security related here. We've been playing with lights for too long. So I'm gonna choose the trigger of when my door sensor contact alarm turns on. In the case of this contact sensor, that means the door is opened. There's actually a setting inside of this one. And that lets you pick what the normal state of it is. So your door sensor might be configured a little differently. But now I have the start of my automation. And let's say that my goal is to make sure that I know when the front door is being opened. But I want to be notified differently depending on whether I'm home or not. So to do that, I'm going to add an action. I'm just going to create a notification and I'm going to send that to myself. If I had a number of other users, well, then I could, of course, send them additional messages. Now, you have to connect these 2 things together, and you'll notice on the trigger that we have a little pin to build off of. We actually have 3 off of the push notification too. So there's some extra things we can do there. But let's just connect the end of the door and window sensor's contact alarm turning on to the left side of that push notification. What this effectively means is when the contact alarm turns on, then we will send a notification to Brian that the front door was opened. If I'd like, I can test this automation in its current state. I could just do that by pressing the play button on the contact alarm. That would test the whole automation, but sometimes you just want to test a little piece of it. So you can actually right click on any of these blocks and you'll get a menu to test from that location. It'll run through that box, or you can copy, duplicate, replace, or delete a box. But what if I don't have my phone around? I wouldn't see that notification, right? So we want to do something else. Let's add a visual notification in our home. I'm just going to add a bulb for this and I'm going to turn it red. I'm also going to turn it on, so we are adding multiple actions. One of the really neat things about this is that I can have multiple things take place after one of these blocks. So I can draw those connections to the two actions directly from that notification. Now, we have 3 actions, but we don't have to organize it this way. So let's rearrange everything so we can clearly see the actions taking place and it makes a little more sense to us. There might be something else you're noticing at the bottom of these actions. There's a pin that comes off the bottom. It's actually an error pin. As in, if for some reason your action doesn't take place or it fails, then the automation would head down that error path. Now let's pretend your hub couldn't send out the push notification for some reason. It would error on that pin, and that would probably be a good time for you to take other actions, so you'd know. In this case, I'm going to create a notification off of that action's error pin. I can type in that a notification to Brian failed. As I showed you before, you can use that to drive other automations if you want. But this is a good thing to have in your timeline to show you when issues happened with your system. It'll help you to diagnose and troubleshoot issues in the future. But if we are home, we don't really care if the front door opens, do we? Or at least not at this level. This is where adding conditions can be so powerful. I will add the presence condition for myself. However, as I choose myself, I can see that it's saying Brian is at home. And what I want it to say is that Brian's not at home. So if I right click, I get a bunch of options, and this is where you can find the inversion option. So now it says Brian's not at home, but we gotta fit this into the middle of this automation. So we're gonna rearrange things by connecting and disconnecting a number of these pins. To delete a connection between 2 of them, you'll wanna go to the middle of the line and then you'll see a little X appear. And then you can click on that and reconnect things however you'd like. Now, when it comes to a condition, we end up with 4 pins on those. The one on the left is how you're coming into the block. So when you're ready to test this condition, you come into it. So we'll attach the trigger to this. The top right pin is if the condition proves to be true. So in this case, if I am not at home, then we want to send out that notification. The bottom right pin is if the condition proves to be false. So if I am at home, we can take another set of actions. For now, I've just connected these together in the way that I think makes sense, and then I've rearranged things. So now it looks good to me, and I can do things like add notes, add additional triggers, and continue to build out this automation to deal with the process of the front door opening. I'm gonna give you an idea for a security situation like this. That whiz bulb would sit there, and it would stay red. Now, one of the things that we do in industrial automation is that we acknowledge an alarm, and that removes the notification wherever they are. So a great way for you to do something like this is to have a button in your home that acknowledges alarms. So if someone presses that, it takes that bulb back to a normal state. You'll have to pick what that normal state is, and you'll have to figure out exactly how to manage that. I'm not going to go into that one today. Now, there are a couple of additional functions if you just right click anywhere on the screen. And I wanted to tell you about these because you can do things like use the add function where you test 2 things coming in, and if they're both true, then it turns on the pin coming out of the block. These are basic logic functions, and they can be very powerful. You also have the ability to add delays into your automations, which is how I added that 1 minute delay with my motion sensor. Those kinds of things can solve a lot of problems when used correctly. And I think overall, just keep in mind as you're building these automations that you'll have to test things every once in a while. You'll want to just let the automation run and see how it runs. And you'll have to potentially build them a few times to get them right. I have too. This is just how it goes. Always remember that you can add in things like notes to remind yourself what you were doing at a time. This is a very good practice. In 6 months, you won't remember why you built an automation the way you did. So you'd end up having to relearn it if you don't leave yourself good notes. And this is where I think automations are going to get a little too complicated for this video. And honestly, the more complex topics need a dedicated one. For right now, let's go through a few simple topics that will make sure you can manage this hub for you and your family. When you go into the More page and the Settings page in the Homey app, you're going to find the Family and Guest option. This is where you can add additional people into your home and where you can control their permissions, at least a little bit. There are 4 levels of permissions with Homey. The first is Owner, which you took on when you set up the hub. Now, the next level down is Manager, and they can do everything except deal with additional users and push through system updates. The next level down is Resident. I don't see a lot of use cases for this one. Initially did, but I feel like if you're going to give someone access to all your zones and flows and variables, you might as well give them Manager access. But maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm a little too trusting. The level for most of the people in your home, I think, is Guest. And that's kind of a weird term, but they can start flows and they can control devices through the app. You share an invitation and you can share that link through any of the numbers of ways that your phone can. It's a pretty simple tool. This will give you extra people in the app, and then they can manage some of your smart home with you. In the More section of the app, there's a settings option at the bottom. It actually leads you to a lot of different things. The General tab just gives you information about your hub, but I think the storage and memory options are really useful to see how full your hub is. You can go into the Update section, but I've just left on automatic updates, and that kind of handles the situation for you. It's kind of what I recommend. If you want the LED ring to be off instead of that spectrum, you could do that. And then you can still manage the LED ring with your automations. You could change the language, your personal location, and you can modify how the timeline works by enabling and disabling different aspects of it. There's an Experiments section where you can turn on Apple HomeKit integration, and there are even virtual devices. Now, on that note, there's actually a plugin for that. I'm going to explore that so we can see what's the best way to do virtual devices with this hub. But given things like variables and the advanced flows, I don't feel a lot of need to be using virtual devices. It'll depend on your situation, and I'd love to hear if you think you need virtual devices still. While we're in this More section, and then the Settings area, we will see the option to integrate with Amazon and Google Voice Assistants. However, following this Get Started button will just take you to a help page. So what you want to do is go to the Amazon Miss A app and go to their skill store. There you'll search for Homey and you'll go through the process of adding in your owner user account to that. And it will integrate your devices. Then you'll have voice control of just about everything that's in the Homey app today. The same holds true with Google, but their process is just a bit different. You have to add a new device, and then you'll have to choose the Works with Google Home option, and again, find Homey. The HomeKit integration I just showed you was in the experimental section of this settings page, and that's gonna take an iPhone, and in general, you're gonna wanna have a HomePod or a HomePod Mini. Those integrations will give you voice control and additional options for automations. In general, Amazon, Google, and Apple integrations with Homey Pro are fairly weak, and I would suggest that most of you are going to be disappointed with the options for sensors, and even just the integration of those sensors. Most of them seem to have come in with the wrong type associated with them, such as motion sensors that have both motion and temperature on them, just coming in as temperature sensors. This kind of problem seems rampant, and it means that you can't really use those sensors in routines or automations in Google, Amazon, or Apple, unless you're interested in doing something based off of temperature. It's a little all over the place, and the only thing you might find some extra use in is that some of your action devices, so things like smart plugs, lights, and things like blinds or curtains have the controls that you would expect in most cases. Control has been very quick, and in Apple, it's definitely a local connection going on. You tap something and it instantly happens. All of the platforms seem to be able to control most of the action devices, and I have found those controls to be good. But just don't expect these integrations to be perfect. At least not today, and given the timeline that Homey's been around and those integration systems have been available, I'm just not sure that we're headed to anywhere that's better. There are a couple of ways to remove apps and devices. I'm going to start in the web app. It's pretty easy to find your different services inside of the settings on the web. This is where you'll be able to look up different apps that you've installed, whether they are a service or a set of devices. And then you'll be able to disable them if you'd like to, but that would keep the service in the storage and potentially in the memory of your hub. And you do have limited resources on this hub. So in general, you'll want to delete applications that you're not using. But if you just want to delete a single device, you would head to the devices page. This is where you can find your set of devices, and although it seems intuitive to click on a device and then find it within the settings, you're actually just going to right click on the device and choose the delete option. With Homey, you'll want to do most of the management through the app on your phone, and it's a very similar, although a little different process. Here you'll head into the More page, choose Apps, find your app, and then you will have to choose the gear icon. This is where you can disable, restart an app if it's misbehaving, and of course, uninstall it. For individual devices, you'll long hold on any device you'd like to delete. Head into settings, and there you will find the ability to remove the device. Now with Homey, it's important to note that when you delete a device, you're not deleting a service. And I think that's actually really good as far as practices go. We don't want to remove an entire service just because we deleted a device. And we don't want that service to reconnect deleted devices. And that's how it behaves. One of the best features of Homey Pro is the fact that you can get data and graphs with any of your smart devices. In the app, if you head into any of your devices, you'll see these simple graphs for different elements. For example, here's the battery level on my door sensor. I can change the time frame of the whole graph, and I can move between, for example, this week and last week. I can also go and look at something a little more interesting, like the temperature changes on that same door sensor. This allows me to diagnose potential issues in my home and maybe decide on thresholds I would use for automations. Now that's all well and good, but it's a pretty limited tool, and you actually get a bit of a better one with the Homey web app at my.homey.app. Here you will find an entire Insights tab. And while you'll find very similar things here, the interface lets me tie a few things together, so it's much more useful. I'm going to choose my same door sensor, and I'm going to choose this week up in the top left. Now I could scroll down and find another temperature sensor in my home, then I can tap on that and it adds a second graph to the page. But if you tap on Add Chart to the existing one and I choose the same secondary temperature sensor, now the two are overlaid on top of each other, and this might provide some insight into what's going on in my home. In this case, actually, I can see a little bit how my front door is affecting this secondary sensor, and maybe vice versa. Probably more useful is the fact that I can add the weather in my area to this chart. Now I can see a really strong correlation between the temperature outdoors and the temperature at that sensor. This tells me that my front door is not really sealed as well as I would hope it was. And it's these kinds of insights that you can get from the data you have in your Homey Pro hub. There are links below in the description to lots of help pages or helpful resources that we used to craft this video or think that you'll find great use in. We also have all the links below to things or devices that we've mentioned in the video. And if you're looking for a specific link, feel free to ask me if you can't find it. But I know that if you're here in the video, you're very interested in Homey Pro. I know we didn't touch on all the complexities and all the capabilities of this system. So I'd like to open it up here and ask you what sort of things you want to learn more about as it relates to Homey, and what sort of topics you need some additional help with. One of the things that many of you told me is that you want automation ideas. So I've been building a set of automation ideas unlike anything else I've seen. Not quite ready to release that as I release this video, but most of you don't watch it on day one anyways. I'm also not just giving you a basic idea and then leaving you on your own to figure out the details. For those of you who use the link below and go look at the book, you'll see that I'm giving you a lot of detail that most creators and most people don't give you when they hand you automation ideas. I'm giving you details about some of the products that will work. Obviously, I can't give you every one, but I give you a few examples. I'm also explaining ways that you can improve the automation with different conditions or triggers, and potentially different ways you can look at crafting the automation. I'm also giving you some of the hang-ups, as in, how does this automation suck sometimes? While you can find lots of automation ideas and videos just like today, you're gonna get a massive amount of them in that ebook. So check out the links down in the description to pick that up today. You'll be supporting us here at Automate Your Life in our continued development of that. Now, as we build additional content with Homey, those advanced topics that you're after, I'll put them in the playlist that is up on screen right now. So if you want to continue in your journey with Homey, you can check that out. Otherwise, you tap down there to get our ebook. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and of course, live smart.